You have Wrocław and you have Krakow. Those are two of the most beautiful cities that I've mentioned that I think are among the most beautiful. Both are very old, more than 1,000 years old. Haven't been destroyed by the war. A lot of cities like Warsaw, downtown, the old town, are less than 50 years old, or around 50 years old, because they were completely leveled. And so it's really nice to be able to have these cities that have so much culture and that have survived that long. I mean, Krakow was a gateway to Western Europe for a long time. That was the main city you'd go through as you're coming from anywhere else in Europe, going to the West. So to have that survive is really unique. And during World War II, when Hitler and his troops came in, the first thing he did is he took back the Rhineland. He took back, well, the Rhineland's actually over farther west, but he took back a lot of land that he claims was German, was Prussia, and that included Wrocław. And so since he just annexed that and put it back into his own country, he decided not to level those cities. So he kept them intact and kept it as his own personal city. In fact, in Wrocław, you have an Olympic stadium that's set up and built there that was going to be used for the Olympics that eventually were held in Berlin. They were initially going to be held in Wrocław, and then Hitler decided to move them to Berlin later on. But just a lot of things there where, because of, I guess, his love for that area and wanting to keep it for himself, he didn't destroy it initially, and they didn't expect at all to have the advancing troops come that far and just basically sweep them out of the country. So that took them by surprise later on, and they were able to keep that city intact. Krakow is interesting because it's a lot closer to where the fighting was on the Eastern Front with the Russians. And so it's got a lot of beautiful castles, cathedrals, just artistic things that are over 1,000 years old. And he had placed explosives, Hitler and his troops, underneath all of these areas. He'd kept them as his personal, little resort town where he had his own castle and things like that. But he'd placed explosives where the goal was, if they were going to be taken by the opposing troops, he'd just level the city. And again, there'd be another Polish city lost. And thankfully, they got a little bit too comfortable down there as well. And the advancing troops from Russia, when they did come in, they fought them out so quickly that they weren't able to detonate or destroy the city. And so those explosives and things were found. They were able to be carefully removed. And so the city was preserved, even though it was Hitler's intention to destroy and level the city. And so there's a lot of things where Poles look at it as like miracles, that their cities and their places that are sacred to them, that are important to their national history, have survived almost just by chance, as it were. But they often feel like it was a lot more than that. In Krakow, so they've got a chapel there, a cathedral, and a tall tower in it. And every day, right now, still they'll have someone. I think it's once an hour or maybe every 15 minutes. But either way, they get up and they start to play a song on a trumpet. And they'll start playing the song, and they'll get partway through the song, and it just stops abruptly. And they do that every single day still. And it's kind of cool. The story behind it is they had one of the invading armies sneaking into the city, trying to attack the city. And this person normally would get up and announce the time by trumpeting. And nobody knew that they were there yet. But as he was trumpeting, one of the archers from the opposing army shot him and killed him. And so his music got cut off immediately. And so instantly everyone in the city was like, what's going on? And so it kind of alerted them and let them know, and they were able to, retreat really quickly and like put their defenses together and fight this invading army. I believe they were Tatars, or the people invading. But either way, they to this day remember that trumpeter saved so many lives and helped save the city because of just doing his duty, and unfortunately dying for it. But they still celebrate that tradition today, the Trójmiasto. And it's right up on the coast. It's on the Baltic, and it's beautiful. The Baltic's actually really warm, and it's nice to swim in. But this is where the Solidarity movement, Solidarność, kind of started. And so towards the end of communism, you had unions up there that were working in the steel and in the shipping industry, and putting together the riveted ships. And they started to try to fight for more union rights, which was unheard of in communism. That was not okay. And so they started to fight for those rights, and started having rallies and things, and they had some massacres and things where soldiers came in and stopped their their striking and their petitioning. But eventually they gained enough traction, because at this point, the Iron Curtain wasn't really blocking media as well as I think it had in the past, to where the rest of the world was able to watch some of these things, and they gained enough traction to where were able to start making progress with communism, and start making provisions where countries and individuals and unions could have rights that otherwise wouldn't be allowed in communism. And they call it solidarity, that together they would stand against it. And they were able to actually get to where they overcame communism. That was the beginning of the fall of communism, and the fall of the Berlin Wall and everything. It started up there in that corner. And so a lot of countries that since then have been able to experience freedom and enjoy that, it came from that movement. And it's kind of cool. One of the initial people who became the first president of Poland, he would go around, and he was unlearned, but just a really charismatic, good speaker, and he'd stand up in the back of a golf cart, or a little cart like a golf cart that they'd use at the plant, and with a bullhorn, and talk and speak to the workers and get them all excited. And one of the people I'd met over there, he said his dad actually was the guy that would drive around that golf cart while they'd give political speeches off the back. And so I thought that was really cool. People are wonderful, very friendly people. Obviously, if you're in a big city like Warsaw, it's like being in New York. If you get underneath that layer of we're big city people, then they're still very friendly and inviting, but they tend to block themselves off some in big cities. Other than that, in the countryside and everywhere else, we would get invited in quite a bit. Older women especially were kind of like grandmas, and they'd be grandma figures to you. So that was kind of cool. So they have a lot of hospitality. The people, they've gone through a lot, obviously, with communism and with World War I, World War II, and wars before that as well. And so they're very patriotic and really nationalistic, stand by their nation, stand by their beliefs, which are heavily tied with their nation, which are Catholicism. And so a lot of Catholic holidays, a lot of Catholic events that they have become part of their culture and kind of who they are and what they do. That's mainly more so with the older generation that remember communism. A lot of the younger generation, our age or younger, don't really associate so much with that, don't remember it, and so they're more like youth around the world today. They don't know if they believe in anything, and so they're becoming a lot more westernized and not necessarily doing as much with their own culture as the older are. A lot of the food they have is just, as we look at it, as just home cooking. So they've got a lot of things with potatoes, with meats, with cheeses, with cabbage, of course, with rice, and so a lot of the meals are actually pretty extensive and kind of exquisite, and they're multi-course meals, where they usually start with soup. Soups are really big over there. They've got a lot of soup, like żurek. They've got a lot of soups that are made out of beets, out of cabbage and things, and they're actually really good. They put sausage in a lot of things. Kielbasa is just a staple over there. It's Polish sausage, and it comes in a variety of flavors, sizes, colors, and that's in a lot of different dishes. And so you usually start with soups, you move on to potatoes. Potatoes are usually small, they skin them, and they boil them, but they don't smash them like ours, like mashed potatoes. And so instead you end up having just a little pile of just, pure white, because they're skinned, boiled potatoes. They don't usually put anything on them, and so just kind of eat them like that. They'll sometimes, if they do some meat dishes with it, they'll take some of the oil drippings, the fat drippings, and from cooking, and sprinkle that over it. They have a lot of stews and things like that. A big, really popular one is called bigos, and it's like cabbage. Often to speed up the process, they'll put sauerkraut in it as well, potatoes, sausage, carrots, just things like that. But then they cook it for a long, long time. So we, cook stew until it's hot and you're good to go. But they sometimes will cook for a week straight, and they'll just cook it on low heat, just slowly add more and more water. And it's interesting. They say that the longer bigos cooks, the better it tastes, which I've actually found is true. It takes out a lot more of that sour flavor that you get with the cabbage or the sauerkraut. but everything kind of just melts down to where it just basically melts in your mouth as soon as you put it in there. It just like dissolves. And so it's kind of an interesting phenomenon. It doesn't necessarily sound as appetizing as it really is, but it's interesting. Probably my favorite is called gołąbki, which literally means like small pigeon, although they don't cook with pigeon meat. At least I hope not. And basically, it's big steamed cabbage leaves that they wrap around rice, sausage, some sort of sauce, potatoes usually. They wrap that up in the cabbage leaf, and then they pour kind of a tomato-based sauce over the top of it. It's actually quite good as well. Again, none of these foods smell good at all when they're cooking, because cabbage smells horrible when it cooks. And so if someone opens their door, you're like, oh, they've been cooking with cabbage. But it's really good. It's actually really tasty. You have naleśniki, which are kind of like crepes, just really thin pancakes. They don't usually put sweet things on them, though. They wrap them up, and they'll put, if you ask for cream or whipped cream, what we'd think of, they actually give you like sour cream and things like that. Or śmietanka, which is a cream that it's kind of like sour cream, or it's like the consistency of buttermilk, though. They'll just kind of pour that, drizzle that over the top. So you're expecting something really sweet, and it's not. Ziemniaki, they're pancakes that are potato pancakes, where they grate potatoes into really, really fine kind of mush, and then make pancakes out of them and fry those. Those are really good as well. We'll eat those either with salt, but also with jams or things like that, jams and jellies. So that's a fun one. I like that one. Pierogi, if I forgot that, I couldn't claim having been over there, which are kind of like dumplings. So similar to pot stickers from Asia, but wrapped up in dough. And they will make them homemade, several hundred to 1,000 at a time. Just all the women will get together and make those for like an entire day, and then they'll freeze them. And so they'll have them for a long period of time. And they'll have everything from meat inside them, that's just shredded meat, or they'll have potatoes and cheese, which are the ruskie, the Russian pierogi as they call them. They'll put fruit in them for dessert pierogi. They'll put cabbage and onions and things like that in them as well. And basically they'll take them from frozen or from fresh, and they'll boil them until they float, at which point they take them out and they throw them in a pan of hot oil or butter, and they fry them, and they eat them that way. And so they've been boiled and then fried, and then you eat them. They're really good. So they're part of the EU, so they have good relations with the EU and with that. So they're part of the open border Schengen agreement, where you can travel between borders once you're in those countries without so much of a hassle, especially if you're an EU member with your passports. But that makes it so that they have to have their outside border locked off fairly tightly, because if you can get into Poland, you can get anywhere else in the rest of Western Europe. And so it's kind of surprising that they send back and deport immigrants probably more frequently than the other mainstream European countries do, because as people come in, they're required to then send them back to neighboring countries that were former communist countries to the east or to the southeast that are trying to get into mainland Europe, or I guess continental Europe, the rest of Europe, and so that puts probably some strain, I think, with their relations with the neighboring countries on the Eastern Front. Not to the extent that I've really heard anyone complain about it or have problems with it. But they're on much better terms with the countries to the west, even Germany, which Poles will let you know that Germans and Russians have never quite been their favorite, for good reasons. They have really good economic relations with them. They do a lot of trade and things like that. And for a lot of these countries, the migrant workforce that comes from Poland, especially working land, is welcome, because they don't have that kind of service or the ability to provide that within their own countries. And so there is a lot of immigration. There's a lot of people moving from Poland to the neighboring countries and coming back to their own country. In recent years, because the economics have improved in Poland, they've had a movement where a lot of the people going to places like England and Britain have been coming home because there's been some more opportunity back in Poland to where they could actually make more with their ability to spend with their lifestyle than you could in England since everything's so expensive. And so it's been improving. It's been improving a lot. Out of all of the post-communist countries, I would say that their economics are the best. You had banks coming in from all over Western Europe that were setting up lending for home loans and things like that, which had never been heard of before, was never an option before. You have tons of international business. You had, when I was there, 20,000 Americans living in Warsaw, just with companies doing international business. And so they have a lot of growth, a lot of potential. And because of that, a lot of people speak English, and a lot of business is now shifting more towards having customer service and meeting people's needs. Whereas before, I mean, it comes from a tradition of, bread lines where people wait at a store and there's only so much and that's all you're going to get and there's nothing else. And so what is customer service? I mean, yeah, it's not about the customers, about what services are even available. And so it's improved a lot. And it's a very friendly country to move around because of that. Easter is really big, of course. Christmas. You've got all the other big Catholic holidays with Lent and things like that they celebrate. And they've got some fun traditions with those. Like with Easter, they take a basket of hard-boiled eggs and other things to their church where it gets blessed. They then decorate them. And they get home and have activities for the kids. With Christmas, Christmas Eve, Vigilia is actually a lot bigger deal than Christmas is. Christmas Day, they have a big family gathering, big meal, and traditional foods for that always. And so carp and other things which we might not necessarily consider good. And from there, they usually open a present or so on Christmas Eve and have a pretty big party with that. They have All Saints Day, where they go and they remember, kind of like on Memorial Day, remember those that have passed, their families. They go to the cemeteries, and it's actually really cool. The cemeteries will get completely lit up with thousands and thousands of candles, and so it's a really beautiful sight. And it's nice to see them remembering their deceased. Let's see, Thanksgiving, obviously they don't have that, but they enjoy learning about our holidays, and so that was always fun to meet people, and they'd want to know about things and be like, hey, make us a Thanksgiving dinner. We're like, that's a lot of work. But yeah, so very hospitable. Like here, I think there's a lot of patriotism with the nation. And with some states, don't get me wrong, like Texas, there's a lot of state pride. But you don't necessarily go through your whole life associating yourself with, I'm from this state makes me who I am. Whereas there, like their hometown, their city where their ancestors have grown up, that's kind of a big deal to them. And so they don't necessarily just up and move and go to a different part of the country. There's obviously a lot of migrant work and a lot of things where they have to for economic reasons, but the people that are there, you'll sit down with like random people and they'll tell you the stories about like what happened there, about communism, about even World War II. You'll find people that'll tell you about that, or people that have been in concentration camps, and they can relate and tell you what happened in that city because they were there and they stay there. And that's their home. In every city, for the most part, they have what's the Rynek, like I mentioned, or the Old Town. And in some cities like Krakow, they've got a castle there. So a lot of the tales and stories you had of knights and the Round Table and all of those things, a lot of those castles actually are in Poland. Germany has a lot of castles as well. I mean, they've got the biggest red brick castle in the world is in Poland. And a lot of them have been preserved and kept now as museums. And so beautiful places to visit. In addition, I mean, obviously you have a lot of other history. You have Copernicus, came from Poland, so you can visit his hometown. You have Chopin, Marie Curie, so her last name is Skłodowska, actually. So there's places in the cities where they have museums and things dedicated to her. She was one of the first ones that came up with like radon, and basically all of our cancer research and treatment today stems from her research, what she did. So they are very rich in both history as well as accomplishments, I guess, with people that did a lot. And so there's a lot of museums, a lot of places like that. Obviously just the beautiful landscape, visiting the mountain towns down in the south, Zakopane, is a lot of fun. Because, I mean, you still have people that are sheep herders down there just pushing around these massive herds of sheep while you're, driving by in a car and things like that. And so it's like stepping back in time in a lot of places. Two cities in particular, Krakow and Wrocław, were fairly untouched by the war. And so, I mean, their original old towns are 1,300 years old or more. And we think about, in terms of like our historical sites in the US, you've got 200 plus years at the best. And that's like something brand new in Poland for a lot of areas. And so it was just fascinating to see these beautiful areas, beautiful cathedrals, very religious people as far as being Roman Catholic. And so Wrocław, they called it the city of churches and bridges. And so I think there was like 120 something churches and about the same number of bridges in the city. So Poland is very flat. So pole means field, and Poland is a very rich agricultural area. So as soon as you get out of the cities, which usually have, 1 million people or more, or at least several hundred thousand, very condensed, you just have vast countryside that's just beautiful, farming everywhere. And you'll pass on trains. We used a lot of trains, but passing through these areas, you would see people farming with tractors, and the next field over you'd have people with like an old plow tied up to a horse. So very diverse that way. But as far as, other than just the landscape being flat, you had coastline up north, which again looks very much like Oregon coastline. You've got a lot of cliffs, a lot of beaches intermittent, but a lot of pine trees right down to the edge of the Baltic. And the Baltic actually was fairly warm. And then down on the south side of the country, you have the mountains. You've got the Karpaty Mountains on the one side, and then you have the Tatry, which are the really tall mountains closer to Ukraine. And so the closer you get down there, the landscape just gets a lot more hilly. But throughout the whole thing, you've got just wide-ranging forests. There's actually a really, really large number of national forests in Poland. And some of these actually are really special for Europe in general. They've got some areas along the eastern border that this is like the only natural forest land that hasn't been cut down throughout European history since they've recorded European history. So they've got some of the most natural, just the way it's been for hundreds and probably even thousands of years, forest land. So they're very proud of their forests, and most people have little cottages outside the skirts of the city that they go to in the summer, that usually lie in the forest or close to the forest, because they don't have yards in the cities. They're usually in apartment buildings. So a lot of lakes as well. You've got a region in the north central Poland called Mazury. They call it the land of 1,000 lakes, and they've got well more than 1,000 lakes in that area. So beautiful, beautiful area. I mean, in the city, yeah, dogs, cats, that's about it. We did have a bat fly into our house once in Warsaw, but other than that, getting out into the countryside, a lot of really, really big horses, like really just majestic. I guess Poland for a long time have been known for their horses. They used them in history. They were actually not always the country that was stomped on and destroyed in war. For long periods of history, they were the conquering nation in that area, and they used these majestic, large, powerful horses as, for fighting and things. So they've got that heritage. They actually have bison. That's one of the animals that they are very proud of. It in some of these specialized or reserves or forest areas, they have a lot of bison. And with their national forests, or their national parks, I guess, if you took national parks from all around the U.S., so park areas that are like sand dunes, park areas that are kind of like swamps, like in Florida, without the alligators, beautiful beach areas, just everything you can think of, every type of park throughout the U.S., they have all of those condensed in Poland. In fact, they even have a little area they call Little Sahara, which is a desert that just goes on and on and on and on, and it's just pure sand, nothing else, just a desert. And so it's kind of unique that, being where it is situated geographically, it has temperatures enough to support a lot of very varied wildlife. So in general, it's a beautiful country with very, very diverse wildlife and nature. It's gorgeous. It's beautiful. If anyone's been up to the northwest, especially along the Oregon coast, a little bit farther south, where it doesn't rain all the time, but it rains almost every day, that's Poland. Very, very green. Green everywhere. It just kind of blew my mind to see how green it was. I remember that. But as far as weather, we had up to 90 plus degrees in the summer, and very lovely, nice, temperate spring and fall. Winter gets a little bit colder. The one winter wasn't so bad, but the first winter I was there, I guess, was the coldest winter they'd had in 40 years. In fact, coming back, it's funny, it was like in my geography textbooks, 2005, this and this, and and it was 40 below zero for a lot of the winter. And so it was just frigid. And there was days where with the wind chill and with the humidity, it didn't matter. I was like, I didn't know I could wear 4 pairs of socks plus all of this and still be freezing cold. And in the winter, because they're so far north as far as their location, they get dark earlier. I remember it getting dark 3 to 4, the sun going down, and we'd work from 4 o'clock, 4:30, all the way until 9 when we'd go back to our house with street lights in the winter. And in the summer, it was the opposite. It felt like we'd be working till 9, the sun was still high in the sky, get home, and we'd have to close all the blinds because the sun wouldn't go down until after we were in bed asleep, and they would come up like 4 or 5 in the morning. And so it was kind of cool to have that, but it was very nice weather overall. In Warsaw, so up north, kind of towards the center of the country, you had a lot more rain. So in the summer, it would usually rain every day. It'd rain for about an hour or two, and then it'd be sunny, clear skies the rest of the day. And so it was just like a nice change. The winter, it does stay gray a little bit longer. They do have a fairly long winter,